So why don't we get into it? I'm going to bring Sean into the picture. Welcome, Sean.
Hi, Sean.
Nice to see you all.
Greetings from Seven Spot. This is such a pleasure for us because we were having a chat offline, and just before you jumped in to say, there's not an awful lot of people know anything about TMC. I knew a little bit about it, but there's most people in this world have no idea about TMC and the TMC Costin, and I'm wondering if you could just fill us in on number one, how it came to be that you got involved with Frank Costin, and how where and how did it start?
It started back in about 1981, 82, because my two brothers, Peter and Val, and myself, we worked for a company north of Dublin in Navan, where we were working with a company called AdTech Toronto or Timony Research, and where we were an Irish company supported by the University of Dublin. Where we were just especially designing military equipment, armored personnel carriers, jeeps, trucks, and fire engines. And Frank was taken in, I think, about 6 months after I started there as a junior design engineer. And my brother Peter was a senior design engineer, and my other brother was an accountant at the company. And at this stage, my interest in motorsport was just watching the local rally around Ireland and stuff like this, and going for weekends and stuff. And then I was then assigned to Frank as his assistant, where he came up with schematics, and then I turned his schematics into more like final proposals, and then ultimately into final drawings of suspension systems for the armored cars, the fire engines, the trucks. And then obviously did all the detailed work. So then we kept the same hours as the factory, and so we worked from 8 till 4:30, and then at 4:35 we closed our books and started talking about racing cars. And then Frank taught me about race car suspension, aerodynamics, ground effects and stuff like this, and then after about a year or so, we started, my brothers especially, started talking to him about the concept of the car idea, which I wasn't involved in it at this early stage of the design project, because I was only a young man and I was having fun, good social life, traveling and meeting friends and stuff like this, and
I was going to say, I've seen one of the best quotes, I think, from Frank Costin, and it was when he was working at Lotus, I think it was. His quote was, "Applied aerodynamics is a combination of knowing physical laws, a great deal of experience, and the right feel." And I think that just sums it up. And I know he did a lot of work for the Havilland on the Mosquito plane as well. So very clever bloke.
Yeah, because he remember him telling me that when he was dragged into Lotus, effectively what he said, that again he had no interest in race cars, and then when they asked him to come in, they started ground effects and aero started coming into Formula One and stuff, that he had to start thinking about it, so okay, this is relatively just what I'm doing, and you turn it upside down, and to get downforce instead of lift, and he started applying his schematics and stuff to that, and ultimately made the cars go faster. And so yeah, he definitely, seeing him perched over his, because we did in those days everything was by hand. I still have my own manual drawing board here in my office, and everything was done by hand. He had his slide rule out. He never saw him without a cigarette in his mouth, and on his desk beside him there was a liter of gin and tonic, and even during normal working days he had his bottle of gin and tonic on the desk there. Whenever he was thinking of something, he just sit back in his like a rocking chair and smoking cigarettes and thinking of concepts and stuff, and sipping a gin and tonic even during lunchtime. And so we became quite good friends. I was with him for like 4 or 5 years, as his assistant, so I will admit to learning a lot from him before we got involved in this concept,
I was going to say that must have been about the time when he was working with space frame chassis, because I know the Marcos, which was about 1959,
Right.
I think it was. I think he'd probably borrowed that from the Mosquito aircraft that he'd been working on.
He, and also he could,
1/8 Marine Ply, I think it was, and spruce bonded, and then he moved on to space frame chassis.
Cork, in Southern Ireland, all the internal paneling was all done with marine plywood, and varnished. I remember as he was doing the car with us, then we spent some time down around Roscarbery where he was based, and he was building the house and designing cars and doing consultancy work all at the same time. At that stage, also with the company Timothy's, we were doing some design work for the Ariane spaceship even at that time. So we were like mixing all kinds of things up. We did a contract with the Tanzanian army for designing trucks and jeeps for them, and we had a crew from there here, and we're teaching them how to work as young engineers and drawing board. Stuff like this, So it was the only company in Ireland that even still that did that kind of work, and they're still active to this day, And so like
did you ever get to meet his brother Mike Costin? Because I know he was also employed by Colin Chapman, and he then went on to be famous for he made it into a partnership. It was with Keith, I think it was Keith Duckworth, and formed Cosworth Racing in the UK.
That was Colin Chapman actually put that together because he wanted to have, at that time, the Formula 1 cars in those days, the engines weren't a stressed component of the car. They were just like a non-stressed thing. And he asked Mike and Keith to do the engine so it would be a stressed component, so he could add stiffness to his car. And he proposed the idea to them for the engine, how he wanted it, where he wanted the mounting points and stuff like this.
Could you imagine what a TMC Costin would be like with a DFV engine in it?
Yeah, pretty amazing actually. Pretty amazing. The power.
I know Frank as well. It's another interesting. I've never met the bloke. I don't know him. I know when he was working at Lotus, Vanwall Racing asked Colin about doing a bodywork, and Colin just said, "Go to Frank." So it was actually Frank Costin that designed all the bodywork for the Vanwall. It was Formula One then, and it actually in the first year it actually won for the first time. It was the first ever Grand Prix Construction Championship. Very clever bloke, and when you look at the shape of the Vanwall, you can see where it's come from the airspace industry, just the streamlining, everything about it.
I'll break away and I'll go because I have one of his logos that he fitted to all his cars, and I managed. We didn't fit them to the TMC because. But he gave me one many years ago as a gift for myself, and it's like a badge you put on the front of the car, and before we go, I'll get it from the drawer it's in and show it to you guys, because it's
that'd be great.
It gives an idea of his engineering skills and stuff, and what he was trying to sell and what he was promoting himself, I think he was a bit of an enigma a little bit before his time. I think if somebody the equivalent of him now is Adrian Newey, And,
that's exactly the impression I got reading through his work that he'd done, and the sheer scope of work that he'd done. I mean, he did work for JCB, he did work for de Havilland, a whole Supermarine he did work for as well, and he even designed his own plane. He was into his lightweight planes as well, wasn't he?
He definitely was always his I would say his keen instinct was always about, the anything to do with airplanes or gliders or anything to do with wing shapes and stuff like this. If you asked him to get involved, that was where his passion was. Everything else paid the bills at times. And I can't say I got the impression from him that he was so super excited about the military equipment stuff we did. The Jeeps had got a bit more excited that we did, getting the suspension and stuff and that, chassis and stuff. Yeah, but yeah, I can't say the military side of it was a big, strong input from him, except on the suspension side, because we did independent suspension all around, stuff like this, inboard disc brakes and stuff like this,
Yeah, that was ahead of its time even then. I mean, even now, not many people have inboard discs and stuff like that. There's a few, not many.
Yeah. Can I ask you, Sean, looking back and at the first time that TMC Costin was put out in a racing format, were you surprised at how quickly it took off and how quickly it started to win?
Maybe not really, because we're a bit naive from that point of view, but the fact is that we brought it in so light.
Yeah.
Could be the first car to be raced only did one race, because that was the last round in the championship that we were striving to get it ready for, which is the big event, and the live TV event and stuff like this. And so we built it just for that one, and we're still building it the morning of the race,
Wow.
And there's so many stories about that. The driver was injured. Because we were late arriving in Mondello at the paddock and stuff like this, the gates were closed, and there's a type of racetrack where you have to drive across the track to get to the inner paddock before bridges and tunnels became involved. Actually, it's still the same to this day. Actually, you have to wait until between sessions and events to be allowed like a 5-minute window to cross the track and things. And but I never forget that John Keeney, the driver, wearing his typical blue racing suit and his peak cap, a bit like Colin Chaplin looked like. He jumped over the fence and ran into the tower and stuff, to plead with the guys to finish this session early so we could get across. And the result of him jumping in, he broke his big toe on his foot, and,
Wow.
And didn't say anything to anybody about it, And we did the practice to qualify in the race and everything. And it's only afterwards that he said to his wife, "Oh, I think my toe's broken. I think we need to get it fixed," And because everybody was so wrapped up in the whole thing, And
I did post up a quick YouTube video, which is quite an old one. But it was of John Keeney, and it was the first race ever that he took it out. I think it was the GT and rally cars at Leinster, the trophy meeting in Ireland. He took pole position. I think it was about 1983, and I think it was running a twin cam engine in that. With all four parts, but it just absolutely murdered the competition. It's great to watch. It's great to watch.
Absolutely, and then the next year, then we built a car. I built a new car from scratch. Again, a new chassis where I took some liberty with reducing some weight and things on the chassis and stuff, and even to this day, that car still exists, and with a roll cage that is probably a bit dubious, and certainly wouldn't pass current regulations, and but we got the car down to 500 kilos, with driver and fuel and ready to run.
With driver as well. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And was that with a steel block or an iron block engine, or was that an aluminum?
No, iron block, and he didn't.
And 500 kilograms. Amazing.
Yeah.
With
Amazing.
the driver as well. Our car's 490, and that's without me in it, and about a quarter of a tank of fuel. So to get it under 500 kilos with a driver as well, and ours is a bike engine as well,
mine's
not a car engine.
493.
Yeah.
And again, I made all the body work, so everything unclipped. We could turn the car from a fully dressed race car into almost a bare chassis in 5 minutes. All the scuttle, the back covers, everything just were all on those Zeus slide latches. So everything came up really quickly. And
I've seen there's a couple of manufacturers going down that route. I mean, ours is an MK, so I'm a bit biased, but they've gone into the Cup 200, and they've done the same thing on the bodywork, that they've now split the rear boot and the front. So, if you have a bit of accident damage, you can just take it off and put a new one on within, I wouldn't say seconds, but within minutes, and get out and still race.
we still had the Escort beam axle in the back of it, and obviously there are times when me especially, I was obviously a lot younger then, 40 years ago, but we had to sometimes change the diff ratio and stuff like this, and we ran magnesium motorbike calipers on the rear brakes because you don't need much braking on the rear. And but I could do a ratio change in about 12 minutes, change the whole diff housing in about 12 minutes, because all the body work just took out of my way,
and the way that space frame is built, you can get right back into the back of it. You can get right into the guts of it.
And the first car we did, we put the radiator in the boot and with the long pipe work and things. But we decided, again, because that was Frank's idea, to use the aero underneath the car for the cooling and stuff like this. But we decided for the second car not to go down that route because there's just so much massive water in the pipe work and stuff, that it wasn't necessary really, because those engines never really suffered from overheating. So again, we reduced the weight of the water and stuff, But like I said to Billy a few times, that having now worked in professional motorsport for the last 40 years, that if I was tasked with doing a project like that again, I could do it a lot better, and but it's easy to look back in hindsight, these kind of things.
Would you say yes or would you say no? You wouldn't take it on?
Definitely no. Definitely no. I mean, like even like this new project I'm working on, I've already said a couple of times to the owner, do you really want to be doing this, and because it's, you're doing something from scratch, and building any car from scratch, is difficult and expensive, But
well, it's big, expensive. Yeah, you got to know what you're doing as well.
And actually, believe it or not, at the moment, it's very hard to get somebody to know what they're doing with designing a space frame.
Really? Wow.
I spent 3 months looking for somebody in the UK, and recently, last year, I found one guy, one company in the middle of the country that had built all the chassis in space frame for the last James Bond movie, and so they turned the Aston Martin into a space frame car, and so they thought they were cocked to hoop and stuff, with their knowledge on building space frames, so we gave them the contract to do it, and here we are 11 months later, and we're just about signing off on the design because they've realized that's how difficult it is to get a chassis to make it stiff and to make it so it passes the current FIA regulations for side impact rollover.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the regulations, the new ROPS regulations are quite tough,
Yeah,
and also the project leader and the design. Well, partly designer is also going to be the driver of the car, and he's only a young man in his early 30s and with a young family. So even though we don't really need to meet some of the FIA regulations from his own personal point of view, he's saying, okay, I can take the hit on the excess weight for my own personal safety. So he has, because this car will be fast.
Yeah.
Well, can I ask you, Sean, moving right along, after you made the decision to sell your interest in TMC and it was purchased and moved over to Panos, you were still involved, I think you mentioned, with their project. Is that right?
Yeah, I stayed involved for about a year afterwards, because what really killed it for us here in Ireland was when the DeLorean scandal hit.
Oh my God!
Because up to that point, we pretty much considered all the cars we built at this stage were prototypes, and design developments, and we're making each one better and better and better. And I have to say, the last 5-6 cars that we built were pretty damn good, and a testament is to some of them that are still out there that are
still doing very, very well on the track.
Exactly, and for the project to continue, we needed to have a big investment in funds, and here in Ireland at the time there's still a company called the IDA, the Irish Development Authority. And so we pitched to them a proposal to expand and whatever, and like back in those days in '86, I think it was, that it was like in excess of 1 million. I can't remember what currency punts it was at that time, and they gave us approval for the funds, okay, but we had to supplement it with, I think, 10% that we had to, as a group, put in personally to top off what the government were going to put into the project. And at this time is when DeLorean scandal hits.
Wow.
All phones were cut off, all communication with the government, everybody, banks, stopped overnight.
There was a great documentary on DeLorean as well, because the government just literally, I know they invested quite heavily at the start, but when they started asking for more money, they just pulled the plug and said, no, that's it. We're not giving you any more. And that was the downfall. I mean, there were great cars. They weren't quite a sports car. They looked great. They didn't particularly go like a sports car, but they were again, they were just a little bit more futuristic, looked ahead of their time.
Oh, you mean they were Back to the Future?
Yeah, well, especially with the finish they were proposing with the polished stainless and stuff like that. The tradespeople in Northern Ireland, hats off to them, did a fantastic job. Marrying all the components from Alfa Romeo gearboxes to engines to whatever. It was
whatever they could get their hands on. Yeah,
and especially for an area of the country that had no pool of resources of skilled labor in that kind of industry, and but yeah, so that was the final nail for it. That obviously had a knock-on effect to us, and at the same time, then obviously Danny Paynos was here in Ireland, getting involved because his wife is from Galway, Danny's wife Melanie and stuff, and he was a bit of a he's a funny character. I mean, I liked him, don't get me wrong, but he was more of he's a bit like Billy, a huge enthusiastic fan, and rather than he knew nothing about making. He didn't have two hands to cut a piece of tubing or anything, and but we built I copied all the drawings and files and chassis and stuff, and then I went out to Georgia for about 4 months out there, and I did some changes to suspension geometry to use the uprights that they wanted to use, which wasn't so difficult. And then I helped to move.
Did they go all Ford components? And I know I think one of the first things they did was shoehorn a big 5-litre V8 in, which then they dropped it down to the 4.6. But that must have taken quite a bit of chassis redesigning to squeeze one of them in.
Not too much, mainly at the bottom of the chassis, a few things have been moved, but the gearbox, the manual gearbox at the time was actually even slimmer than the one we were using, so therefore I could move tubes around and actually gain some stiffness back in around the gearbox area because the gearbox was smaller. The connection with Ford came because I think it was 85, 86. 85, I think it was. When we were looking at going to America, I went to Detroit and I met with Ford in Detroit, and I came away from. At that stage, they didn't have the modern engine coupled up to a rear-wheel drive format. They were just starting to launch the front-wheel drive Escorts and Fiestas and stuff. So I came away from there with them putting a crew onto building the XR3 into the rear-wheel drive format that we now see today in the Sierras and like afterwards. We were the first people. We were the first people to ask them to do that, and then they actually had a company in the UK that did this work on their behalf. So we then got new engines and everything came from UK. Gearbox assembled to the engine with the engine mountings that we asked for, with all the engine kit, clutch cable, throttle cable, everything came with a kit, from this company in UK. And believe it or not, actually, I made contact with them about 6 or 8 months ago because it's a special flywheel that had to be made to do the adaptation. I think it was for Billy. I was looking for this flywheel for, and I made contact with them, and they said they knew nothing about this drawing. They knew nothing about these part numbers and stuff like this, you know. And eventually, one guy in the company remembered the project, you know, and he actually was able to go to an old warehouse that they had storage in, and he found the drawings for me, you know, and like 40 years later, because he said, I knew about this project, you know, but he said, I was only a junior gopher in the company at the time, you know, and he remembered it, you know.
It's one of those things where, in the back of your mind, you know it's somewhere. You know you've got it. You know it's somewhere, but where is it? Yeah. Minded perhaps.
It is amazing how much it's all changed, you know, in the last 40 years, you know. But no, then I was starting to get into new other projects, and then my senior fabricator here in Ireland, his name is Michael Murphy, or Dripping to his friends, Mickey Drip, and then he went out. He stayed out there for like 6-7 months, you know, teaching them about fabrication skills and stuff like this. You know, he absolutely loved it out there, you know. I actually don't know why he came back, to be honest with you, you know, but I'll probably homesick.
What age was he then? You know? Sean, was he very young then, wasn't he?
Yeah, early 20s, 25, 26, I would say, you know. But what a great fabricator, you know, and he had a ball out there, you know. He had a ball. You know, especially down in Georgia area, you know, it was amazing.